Hi, everyone. We are live today from Simon & Schuster for our Book Club Favorites May discussion. This month's book is Ask Again, Yes. And we are here with author Mary Beth Keane, which is very exciting. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. And we also have with us Kara, one of our editors, and Kate, part of our publicity team. So reminder to everyone that we have a giveaway today. If you want to enter into the giveaway, please ask a question in the comments for a chance to win. We're giving away 3 books to winners, which would be, the 3 books are Ask Again, Yes, today's book. Sorry, guys, I'm looking at my notes and also trying to communicate to everyone. Our June book, The Family Upstairs, and our July book, This Tender Land. So again, ask a question in the comments and we might also answer it on screen. And now I'm going to throw over to Kara, Kate, and Mary to take over and start the conversation. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, guys.
Good to see you. Hi. So Mary Beth, thank you so much. We were excited that this was the book club pick this month. You could just tell us a little bit about, tell us the story a bit.
Without spoiling the plot.
Yeah, right. Plot spoilers.
So the story is about 2 families who end up living next door to one another in a suburb of New York City, in Rockland County. Some people have gotten that wrong. They've called it Long Island or New Jersey. And the dads in both families are police officers in the NYPD. They're rookies. The families are not close exactly. They're sort of bonded by what the dads do for a living. But the kids, the son in one house and the youngest daughter in another house, become really close. And it's about this event that happens that sort of drives the families apart. And they think they're never going to see one another again. But then, of course, they do see one another again. And it's about how they work through in their adulthood all of the things that happened to them in childhood. Like there's plot, but the story is really about love and estrangement and all of the things we do to the people that we love for one reason or another, and how we protect it and how we put it at risk and all of those things.
One thing that I really loved about it from the first time I read it was that the characters feel so oft, and I'm just curious. I'm laughing because we've talked about these questions before, but I'm curious about if you could don't already know about some of the research you've done.
You know what? You went in and out for a second, but I already sort of know what you've asked, so I can answer the question. The research is the fun part for me. I like, you need the language to have a lot of authority. It has to have a lot of confidence. And I didn't know really anything about being a police officer or being in a cop family. What a person who is a cop in New York City would think about, when he's home on the weekend, what his spouse would think about, what his kids, how he'd sort of operate and deal with what he saw at work. So I talked to and interviewed a lot of police officers over a plate of eggs at our local diner, as you already know. And I would just ask a lot of questions. I mean, there are a lot of memoirs, which I also read, and those were really helpful to an extent. But what I really wanted to know about was I didn't need to know about cases or any like wild thing that happened in the 70s. I really wanted to know how people felt, what they could get away with, what they saw that they would never have reported, thoughts that went through their heads that they'd never even really, maybe even realized they had until I was sort of pulling it out of them, things like that. And then the other aspect I researched a lot, there's a character in the book who has, I'll call it a mood disorder because the diagnosis would have changed a little bit over time. And I wanted to know what it would have been like for her and also for the people around her, how much they understood about her, how much they would have maybe presumed. And so I did a lot of research in that aspect too. But I like to wear research lightly, when I can, because it's very tempting when you come across something really interesting to like stick it in a book. But it usually doesn't work that way. So again, I just wanted enough knowledge, I guess, to be able to write confidently, as those characters.
Was there anything specific that you remember learning that you were kind of surprised by, or that, you did end up using in the book?
And how forthcoming were they? Was it hard to pull these stories out?
The cops were not, I think they thought they were forthcoming. They would, I think if you ask any, especially retired detective from like the 70s, 80s era to talk about the job, they will talk for days, nonstop. The problem for me was that the stories were so varnished. They were presented. You could just feel how often they had been polished. And that just wasn't useful to me, I've told you guys this before, but one of our first meetings, I wanted to know about language. Like there are so many phrases that we've seen them on like Law and Order and places like that. But again, I wanted to wear it lightly, but I couldn't get those things wrong. So when I said something about a badge early on, this cop that I was talking to was like, nope, it is not a badge, it's a shield. Things like this, you just cannot get wrong. What did I use that was surprising? Things about, I don't want to out any of my sources, but there were things that people told me, went on in the 70s and 80s that I guess I was naive about. And then, that looking back, that was probably foolish, but I just, I didn't need to showcase those things. I just needed to know what the world was like, I guess. The mental health aspect, I was surprised by how little lines up case to case. Like if you have a person who has one diagnosis, it really doesn't look the same as a person with the exact same diagnosis in a lot of cases. I was careful about that because if someone you love very much is diagnosed with, say, like bipolar disorder, and it doesn't look the same as the character you're reading, people get really protective of their own experiences. And I really respect that. And I didn't want to alienate anyone. And so I had to be really careful about that. It was both eye-opening and also like a little bit scary that, there's no way to nail down a specific thing and then treat it, diagnose it, medicate it, have a clear-cut plan because so many mood disorders sort of change over time. But without spoiling the plot, I just wanted to know if the arc I had in mind for this one particular character was even possible. And it was. Thank God.
You did a really great job of that. We're so much love for so many of the characters, but I know we all kind of share one favorite. So would you mind telling us who your favorite character is?
George is my favorite character. And he was one of those, I would read or see interviews with other writers who would say things like, oh, it just wrote itself after a certain point. And I thought like, what nonsense. Like that just cannot be true. But George was, I won't say he wrote himself, but I didn't see him coming really. I knew that there was this uncle that, would show up from Christmas from time to time. And he sort of wished he saw him more because his neighbors had this like endless, like big Polish Italian family that was always coming and going. But then, I don't know, George just sort of came back and he was like fully formed and he was flawed. I think of him as being flawed, but most of his demons are behind him. And he's sort of winging it, but he's looking at every situation and coming out on the side of love, and saying like, I don't know what I'm doing. I love you. We'll see that if this works out, and you try and you fail and you try again. And I just liked him a lot. And I could see what he looks like too, really well.
So actually that's a big question we've gotten a lot from the audience is like, who's your favorite character? And the other one related to characters that we're getting is what came first? Was it a character? Was it the setting? Was it the theme? And that's another big question. I think the initial person who wants to know is Kathy.
Well, Kathy. The characters always come first for me, but those things are also built in a little bit. I didn't just I saw Peter first. I saw Francis almost at the same time, but I could also see that, when you see a person, you also see what they're carrying, to an extent. And so I felt Peter had this like essential loneliness, I guess. And so it's not as if I just saw him and didn't know him. I felt like I already knew him. Same with Francis. So those things are not as disconnected, as Kathy might think. They're all sort of the same. I also knew this wouldn't take place in like Scarsdale. I saw this town as a working class town where people might want to maybe like end up a step above where they started, and some would and some wouldn't. And so I saw those things, but the center of the story, the whole point for me is the character.
Mhm.
And I think characters determine the plot. I don't think it can happen the other way around. Like George, he showed up and stuff started to happen. That could only happen because he showed up,
Right. One theme that emerges over the book is this idea of forgiveness, whether it's Peter and his mother, or Kate and Peter and their marriage, Lena and Francis and their marriage. Everyone kind of has to forgive Brian. Can you just talk a little bit about forgiveness? How, was that something you had in mind when you set out to write?
I don't think of any of these things like as consciously as I sometimes imply, in events like this. It's hard to, I'm worried I sound smarter than I am. You know what I mean? It's not as if I had, I don't know, surface thoughts about forgiveness, but I do know that was the center of the book for me. I think that writing a book is trying to find out what I think about a thing. So I don't go in knowing the answer. The whole point is that I'm seeking the answer, I guess. Like, do we know what we're doing at any point in our lives, truly? I don't know that we do. And so if you look back at the things that have been done to you, any sort of trauma or neglect, within reason, of course, is it possible to forgive the previous generation for their mistakes? And I didn't know the answer. I'm still truly not sure I have a strong opinion, except on a case-by-case basis, like here. But I think for healing and for these particular characters and what they went through, it would be somewhat pointless and toxic, to hold on to things for no reason, when everyone felt lost, I guess, at the time that they failed their families or themselves, and so I don't know, it's a complicated answer. I think sometimes readers want a really clear answer, and I just don't have one,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said about writing something as a way to figure out how you feel about it. That sort of leads us to the question of what was going on in your life that you were figuring out when you were writing this.
Well, there were a couple of things sort of on the periphery of my life. One of the main things was we have a long family estrangement in our family. This book is not that. It's totally different. But I think because I write fiction, fiction's like a way of seeing objectively something that I have to consider in real life. And in order to see it objectively, I make it totally different. And so I had to explain to my kids, who were getting older. I think when you have kids, you never think of the day they're going to start asking questions. And next thing that day is upon you. And I wasn't prepared for how I would answer those questions. And it got me thinking about estrangement and how it happens not overnight, but like inch by inch, day by day. You say, I'm not going to speak to this person until we work this thing out. Next thing, 6 months have gone by. Next thing, years have gone by. And then there you are, and you have maybe a grandparent who hasn't met a grandchild, and how do you recover from that once too long has gone by? In addition to that, there were all sorts of things. I turned 40 and my parents were starting to, fail a little bit. They were getting older. And they started remembering back to things that they wish they were doing better. Friends' marriages were breaking up that I thought were solid, just a lot of confusing things. Alcohol. I grew up in a culture where we drank young, but I know that I don't have a problem with alcohol and I don't know why. And I really had sympathy for the friends who were struggling with that. And I really couldn't figure out why they were, above me, above other people I know who could get it together maybe a little bit better. So all of these, it was like a big stew. It just went into it. And again, I don't know that I came up with answers. I just wanted to examine the questions a little bit more closely, I guess.
Do we have more audience questions?
You guys are going in and out a little bit for me.
I muted myself and I couldn't get out of the mute. I'm sorry. Yeah. So We do have a couple questions. Some things we have touched on a little bit, but I think there's a big question. I mean, a lot of discussion around research into mental illness and the research into alcoholism and which one was more difficult to write. And those are coming from Kathy, Gina, and Kathy and Gina, sorry. Those. So I think that if you are able to touch on those a little bit more, people seem to have a big interest in that.
I mean, the alcohol part of things, I suppose, was easier to write in a way because I just used my own observations and my own experiences. I did read a lot about addiction, and I talked to some, advocates, I guess, for people who were struggling. I talked to people who were in AA and other sorts of meetings like that, or groups like that, and what they did and did not get out of those things. But I really could tap into my own, imagination. Like I said before, research for me is mostly about confidence. And, fortunately or not, I feel like this is a world I have some confidence in, I can write about. The mental health aspect was far more intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a whole draft avoiding Anne's point of view. I just had her observed by the other characters because I was scared to enter that. I was so afraid of getting it wrong that it would be a caricature, it would be oversimplified, and that would be offensive to people and it would just be bad writing. But then after a draft or two, I realized it just wasn't feeling like I was evoking as much sympathy for her as I wanted. And the only way to do that, because she didn't present the way that she was actually feeling, I needed to step inside her to sort of show that she was afraid. And I think, at least for me, once I understand that a person is afraid, I just automatically have sympathy for that person, even if the thing they're afraid of seems maybe ludicrous. It's still a thing that they're feeling. And so that helped. I just did it bit by bit, and then I got more confident. I was lucky enough, I had two people. I read a ton of memoirs, but I had, there's a forensic psychiatrist that I met when I was doing some speaking for Fever. I met him at Montefiore and he helped a lot. And I had another friend who was a psychiatrist for the NYPD, which sort of hit both categories. And she helped too. And, they were both able to talk a few things through with me. And then other people too, who'd been through it. And I just asked a lot of questions, and as soon as I understood that someone felt comfortable talking about their experiences, I would just ask and ask. And I think people are mostly happy to talk if they don't feel if they feel sure that they're not being judged, and if questions come from a place of sympathy. But that was definitely the scariest part, for sure.
Great. And on the flip side, we have Irene wants to know, what was your favorite thing about writing this book?
Gosh, this book almost killed me. I can't think of a thing that was, this was a hard one. I guess all books are, but this one was really hard. The nicest thing that's happened after, I don't know if this counts as an answer, Irene, it is what's happened afterwards, in that people in other parts of the world are identifying with it. It's now being translated into a lot of languages. And I worried for 4 years that only Irish people living in my town would understand the way these people were. So it was like a shock. I was like, well, it's like a little New York suburbs, cop book. And I really worried about that. And now to see people from all over the world say, this could be my mother, this could be, and you just replace those variables. And I think it's a pretty common story, actually. And that's been really moving. That's been my favorite part.
Yeah, it's pretty universal. And I think along the same lines, Elena wants to know, besides forgiveness, what are some of the other messages that you might want readers to capture from this? I think there's that relatability and that universality kind of, applies to a number of different things. What would you say besides that you really want readers to kind of understand and take away?
I guess to put yourself in other people's shoes, to just consider your responses to things as if you are, not yourself, as if you have someone else's experiences and then maybe you would be responding differently. I mean, we're seeing, I always think about that in everything I write, but even like right now in my town, we're living in a very strange, very tense moment right now. And recently there've been a couple of cases here where somebody has taken photographs of kids who are clustered together, who are maybe not 6 feet apart, and then posting them in public places and chastising the parents. And then the parents go wild because somebody took a photograph of their kids. But like everyone is just afraid right now. They don't know what the heck is going on. Someone could have an elderly parent that lives with that. You just don't know. And so don't, lose your mind in a public forum before you maybe think about it for 2 seconds, and understand that people do crazy things when they're afraid. So I guess that's just something I think about, not only in this book, but I guess in my other books too. We hear stories all the time. Sometimes I feel worried that I'm tuned into gossip. I never want to be a gossip, but it is really interesting to me what people talk about and repeat. I think it always comes from a place of their own fears. They latch on to these stories that maybe play into their worst nightmares and they pass them on it does something. Right. And so I'm really tuned into the things that get passed on and the things that don't. My friends say I'm the worst gossip because I don't remember who anybody is or any single detail except like a central character, trait that's at the center of whatever, wrong has been committed. How did I get here? I don't know. But I guess that was a theme I was thinking about too, because people in the town talked about Anne. I'm sure. Yeah. They talked about Peter, they talked about everything that happened, but nobody knows the whole story. No one ever knows what's going on inside somebody else's home or their marriage, or you just have absolutely no clue, even if you feel really confident that you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the title, which people often ask about.
Yes.
The title comes from, for the bookie people out there, comes from Joyce, from Ulysses, the Molly Bloom soliloquy. I just had a few things, like I said, writing this book was rough. And there were days when I felt like I couldn't write, but I made myself sit in the chair, and put in some time. And on those days I would read. And sometimes I read new things, but a lot of times I read things that I already knew I loved. Just a sort of like, it was like a reset button. Like, this is the level I want to get to. I don't want to write garbage. This is what, the right track feels like. If I want to write toward optimism, then I would read a couple of passages that have made me feel optimistic. And that was one of them. That book is one that just feels so cynical to me, except at the end where it turns, it suddenly becomes a deeper meditation on a longer relationship. And you realize, like I was just saying, that the reader doesn't know everything there is to know about these two characters in Ulysses. And you get a sense of their long shared history and what it actually means, a lot more than that one day. And so I guess because I kept looking at it and writing toward it, even though it has nothing to do with Ulysses, I just thought it was a good title for a book. And I gave it to Kate. I put it in Kate's mouth at one point. Kara's going to laugh because I always say that comma belongs to Scribner books. It wasn't there originally, but I like it there now. But that was an ad later on. In the original, I just want Joyce scholars to know I'm not an idiot. I know that there was no comma in the original, but in my version there is.
There's kind of like no punctuation there, right? In that paragraph.
Right.
Yeah. But I'm always imagining some people being like, oh, some Joyce scholar.
Right.
The comma in there. Yeah.
Yeah, there were strong feelings about adding a comma.
Yeah, there
So-
were. Mm-hmm. I have the email to prove it. Yeah.
Well, we have two other things that came up that I think are great to touch on. The first is fever, especially considering right now. So I think there was a question about what else have you written? So do you want to tell us about fever?
Fever, yes. I wrote a book called Fever about Mary Mallon, who was the real life Typhoid Mary. A lot of people don't know that Typhoid Mary was a real person, and she was. She was a cook at the turn of the century. She emigrated from Ireland, very working class. She lived alone in the city, which was a really unusual thing, but evidence says she was able to support herself, so she must have been a pretty good cook. She cooked for people in like the Rockefeller circle. And, these are people who could hire anyone, and they hired her. And basically, she became the first healthy carrier of typhoid fever found in North America. And she passed it along through her cooking. So
asymptomatic, right? Like she didn't have any, yeah.
Yes, she apparently never had typhoid fever, but she was passing it through her cooking. They eventually found out like 30% of the time, which is also what made it confusing, because sometimes she'd cook for people and it was fine. She wasn't producing the bacteria for whatever reason. And then sometimes she would. So it was a really difficult thing for people. I mean, back then, germ theory was brand new. And there was also a big class difference. The educated elite believed one thing. The people who lived in the tenements, who were straight from Europe, believed another thing, and there was a lot of like, back then you could just put a sign on your door basically and call yourself a doctor, and the neighborhood might go to you for your tinctures and your heroin and cocaine, like to treat a cough. I mean, these things, it was a free-for-all. And so they never really explained to her what being a healthy carrier was, what it meant. And they really never gave her a chance to have a different career, do anything else. Instead, they just vilified her and put her on an island in the East River called North Brother Island. It was a tuberculosis hospital. Anyway, so the book is about her life and all the things that she went through, and sort of a defense of her point of view. Again, she did a lot of things that were wrong, and she was stubborn. She was sort of willfully ignorant at a certain point, but her story becomes relevant again and again whenever we have a moment like we have now, where the public health is pitted against an individual's rights. It's my right to not wear a mask, says a lot of people, but you want to protect, your fellow citizen, you wear a mask. So it's her right to continue to cook. She's not sick. She's healthy. She's making money, but people have the right to protect themselves against her. And so who, in a moral struggle, who is right? Her story became relevant, in the AIDS crisis in a big way. I think there was like a TV show, there was a radio broadcast that was a hit. They're all different versions of her, because she really left nothing behind. She left no diaries, there were no letters. And so I fictionalized her pretty much entirely, but I'm really sure that I got it. I think that I really nailed her.
100%.
Yeah.
She's another flawed character, but through your approach, we feel sympathy and connection to her.
Yeah, she's morally complex. I mean, who wants to read a book about all good people? That sounds like the most boring book imaginable. Same with like all villainous people. It's just, you don't want people to be that simple, because they're not. So she was just a fascinating figure to me. I think what she needed was a good publicist, Kate. She had no sense of what she said in public and how awful it was. And she was just like indicting herself over and over, just mad. And she was just like this ball buster. I liked her.
Yeah, messaging.
But she'd be the type of person you'd be afraid to invite to a party. So you'd be like, oh, don't say anything.
Yeah, no more talking.
And Elizabeth Moss bought the movie rights, so we're really hoping
Ooh, that is so exciting.
Elizabeth Moss, if you're watching right now.
Oh, I'm sure she's watching. Yeah.
Wrap up Handmaids.
That's so exciting.
And they just re-upped. So I don't know. She's topical.
Yeah.
Do it, Moss.
Yeah.
And then the last question, and I don't know, so we have Leslie, Anne Marie, and Vesna are all wondering if you can talk about it. Are you working on anything new?
I am. Yes.
Well, that's great.
Last word.
We are all looking forward to it. And I think we're just about out of time, but we really are so grateful to you for joining us. Everybody really loves having you here, and lots of questions came in. So thank you so much to everyone who participated. And Mary Beth, thank you so much. Yes, if you haven't read
Get
Ask
your
Again Yes.
paperbacks.
Can I say one thing? These,
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. Yeah.
but these two people, they're on my bottom, Kate and Kara, of my screen, made this one fun, but made this whole process a blast. I mean, I tend to be pretty nervous about all events and all things to do with writing, but they made it really fun. So nice
Now
to
we're
see
really
you.
blessed.
Well, the book was beautiful, very beautiful. So thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks. This was fun.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Reminder, you can continue to ask your questions even after this is done to enter into the giveaway. Our next month read is The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. Our discussion is on June 25th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So be sure to tune in, and you can get more info about Ask Again Yes and Fever in the comments and in the About section on this. So thank you so much to everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.